Ross Tucker. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Nick. I'm a big fan for the stuff you used to do online, and also I know you're a big supporter of the Bills. And
Yeah.
I played for 5 teams, and playing in Buffalo for the Bills is by far my best experience. My wife and I loved it up there.
That's so nice to hear, and I have to say, you know, it's nice you say that at a time where Buffalo's getting a lot of attention for one of the few negatives of living there, which is you get hammered by snow. But I can't tell you how many guys I know who play for the Bills and Sabres who stayed there because it's a great place to live and raise a family. And I love that you shout out to Buffalo like that. I certainly remember you playing for the Bills.
Yeah, man, it was awesome. I mean, first of all, I was there for 3 years, and the snow was never really that big of a deal. Now, I mean, after the season, we didn't make the playoffs, so I go back home to Pennsylvania. So I don't know what it was like in January and February, but when I was up there, you know, I played for other teams, Cowboys, or places where right after practice, every guy would go their own way or go to certain adult establishments or whatever, what have you. But Buffalo was almost like it was college again, except we all had money. Like Bledsoe would get a keg, we'd all go over to his house. It was awesome. It was like you're a family. Everybody hung out together. A lot of these other teams in some of these other cities, everybody just goes their separate way, does their own thing.
Wow, I love to hear that. I know that, you know, back in the Super Bowl era, Jim Kelly had a pub in his basement. And that's where the team would adjourn after games. And, you know, I do think that that's not only a team-building activity, but, you know, it sort of breeds a sense of family. And it's so Buffalo for everybody to get together and have a beer after pretty much anything. We got a lot to talk about. One of the things I did want to ask you about, I've tracked your career in the media, and I've always enjoyed what you brought to the party. And you've got an interesting perspective for me because you're a guy who has succeeded without being one of these marquee names that ends up getting wooed into the studio, whether they bring anything to it or not. You had to go and build a career. How did you go about starting that?
It's a good question, Nick, and it's not easy. You know, the good news is, I guess, is I came into it with my eyes wide open. In fact, so many guys, when you're playing, say they're going to be a broadcaster, that I actually got turned off to it. I mean, that's what I always wanted to do when I was growing up, but then when I actually got to the league, I would do an internship with Merrill Lynch or when I was at the Cowboys, the Roger Staubach commercial real estate company, thinking I would do anything other than media. But then the NFL had a broadcast boot camp. I thought, you know what? Even if I work in finance and maybe just do the Princeton games at my alma mater on the weekend, I got to have to do something football. And then I went there and I kind of realized that, you know, maybe being able to write, like I had done so much in school, could be a competitive advantage for me. And so that's the perspective I try to give, is also as the perspective of a journeyman. You know, I wasn't a star, right? So when I played for 5 teams in 7 years, I pretty much know coaches, players on every single team. But you're right. I mean, sometimes, Nick, I do kick myself for literally entering the only profession that's based in part on my athletic ability in my previous profession, which doesn't seem that bright considering my athletic ability was really not that great compared to my peer group. But it's fun, man. I mean, I'm 35. Every morning I get up, I usually am wearing flip-flops, shorts. I do my radio show from home.
Yeah.
You know, I'm 35. I don't feel like I've had a real job yet. So I think that's the goal, to try to avoid one of those.
I approached life from the same point of view. I was like, man, if I can just get through this without having a real job, I will feel like a wizard, you know? And we're talking with Ross Tucker. And, man, check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast on Podcast One. Because as Ross was just alluding to, the guy brings content. You know, that was always my sword in the stone was, you know, I wasn't an ex-player. I wasn't even a broadcaster. But when I've worked at websites, at ESPN, NFL.com, anywhere, it was point of view was how I got in the door. And, you know, that's the stuff that you want to read. And that's what I always noticed about your columns starting at ESPN, that you had a point of view. And the journeyman point of view in football is a fascinating one. I mean, I think that's where the real stories are. And, you know, you were exposed to, like you said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams I got on my card that you played for. Everyone you're exposed to a different culture. You played for Belichick. I'm curious about with LeGarrette Blount getting booted off the Steelers and they scoop him right up. What is the culture there in New England that is different from what was going on with him in Pittsburgh?
That, what's interesting about that, I was not in Pittsburgh, so I don't know that culture. I would think that the Steelers, given their history, I mean, they've got some strong leadership there with Big Ben and Harrison and Kiesel. Hard to believe, by the way, that maybe their two best defensive players are 36 years old and were retired 3 months ago, but that's another story. That's just amazing. But, I think what happens is I think in New England, there's a sense, Nick, that it's almost like big brothers there, that they're always watching. And I think that maybe that's what helps keep LeGarrette Blount in line. And I was amazed that, I played for Buffalo 03, 04, 05 until they cut me. And we always played the Patriots. I'd started those games. We lost. They won the Super Bowl both years. And I went to New England. And the truth is, Nick, when I was there were a lot of guys on that team that weren't real happy. Whether it's they felt like they were undervalued with the contract they signed to be there, or there was a lot of negative reinforcement. I mean, that was my fourth team at the time, and it was, one of the generally unhappiest teams I'd been on. I thought, okay, I guess you got to be somewhat miserable to win Super Bowls. I didn't know any different. I hadn't been in the playoffs yet. I said, okay, maybe this is what it's like. But I found that very interesting that they signed me like midway through the year. These dudes are going for their third straight Super Bowl. And for the most part, everybody's kind of in a bad mood, not real happy, and it's negative reinforcement, Nick. I mean, the first thing they do every morning is show like the 3 or 4 worst plays from practice the day before. So your whole goal is to not be on the low light reel.
Wow. This is the candor I love about you. That is so interesting. I mean, look, the tone is set up top no matter what you do. And, no surprise that Belichick has a grumpy building, and it seems like guys do get sort of thrown to the wolves there. I mean, look what happened with Logan Mankins this year. Wolfhook, that holdout he had. I mean, this guy is cornerstone. You just can't have the same defense without Vince Wilfork, and they find a way to alienate these guys. So that's really interesting, just from an outsider's perspective. That they find a way to win in a sort of a miserable situation. Starting your day getting called out is always fun. Fascinating. You're going to be doing the Harvard-Yale game this weekend, right? That's the 131st Harvard-Yale game. Is that the oldest tradition in football?
It's up there. I think Lehigh and Lafayette are actually playing Yankee Stadium this weekend.
Wow.
They played 150 times, which means they must have played multiple times in a lot of years, because there's no way it's been 150 straight. But it's a big deal, Nick. I mean, ESPN's College Game Day is here. Whoever wins the game, wins the Ivy League title. That hasn't happened in a long time. I think, in fact, they said this is the 7th time that's ever been the case where, the winner gets the Ivy championship. So it's awesome. I've been doing the game, Nick, for 5 or 6 years now, and I'm very happy that I went to Princeton. It was a great experience. But this is the one game where they'll get 35,000 people at Harvard and sell it out. They'll get 45 at Yale. And it really, when you look at the tailgates, when you look around the atmosphere, it's the one game that really feels like a Big Ten SEC type of game.
I love the College Game Days there. That I did not expect. It's interesting. We were looking at the standings there in poor Columbia, 0-6. I remember I was living in New York, I think, the last time they had a pulse, and that's when Jason Garrett's father was coaching the team, and the Garrett boys were playing. And, they had like a ringer deal there. You bring your boys and come coach the team, we'll be competitive. But, that's a story for another day. But Ivy League football, that's how you cut your teeth. Do you think that your jump to the pros from the Ivies, how radically different was that from a guy, let's say, who came out of the SEC?
You know what, Nick? I don't know. I mean, let's put it this way. When we were at Princeton, Nick, we used to watch like a Florida State-Miami game and wonder how well we would do if we were able to have 13 guys on the field the whole game. When you're in the Ivy League,
that's great.
You really don't know how good they are. I didn't know at my first mini camp, Nick, if, Big Daddy Wilkinson or Bruce Smith, I didn't know if they'd pick me up and like break me over their leg. I mean, I had literally no frame of reference, no idea. And the guys were a lot better than the Ivy League, but you talk to the guys in the SEC, they said, man, it's a lot better than the SEC too. So I don't really know what the jump is. To be honest with you, I thought they'd be better. I mean, I had built up the NFL so much in my head
Yep.
that when I got there, I was like, all right, they're all bigger, they're all faster, but they're still human beings. They're not that much better. And I kind of thought they'd be better. The two things that stood out to me from my first mini camp were just the way the punters could punt the ball, which was crazy. And I kept hearing a whistling sound, and it was I couldn't figure out what it was. It was Jeff George throwing the ball.
Oh, wow.
Anytime Jeff George threw the ball, it would whistle. That's how fast it went. It was unbelievable. I'd never seen anything like it in my life.
I love
Still
it.
haven't.
I love the details. And like I said, that's the candor that made you one of my favorite guys in sports media right now. Ross, thanks for jumping in. We really appreciate it. Everybody, Ross Tucker Football Podcast on Podcast One. Really had a nice time talking with you. Hope we do it again soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Nick.
You bet.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern. On Audience.